Hello to all Cinemaster lovers. The movie begins with the girl, Lucinda, at her school. Lucinda was an introverted girl, always keeping to herself at school, not talking to anyone or expressing interest in anyone. She was always sitting in a corner, not interacting with anyone. And at the school, there was also the teacher, Taylor, who always took care of Lucinda and tried to be there for her because she liked her more than any of the other students. She gradually tried to get her involved in school activities so that she could get used to her classmates and try to communicate with them. One day, the school announces a competition for the most important ideas that students can present in celebration of the school's anniversary. After that, all the students start thinking about suitable ideas that could be showcased on that day. Then, the results come out, and Lucinda wins the competition, giving her the opportunity to implement her idea on that special anniversary day. Lucinda's idea was a time capsule, where each child would draw a picture representing their vision of the future. After 50 years, each student would open the capsule to see what their parents and families used to think about and care about back in the day. Then, Taylor asked the students to draw their pictures, and as time runs out, she collects their papers. However, Lucinda was still writing. When the teacher approaches her, she realizes that instead of drawing, Lucinda had been writing numbers, despite the fact that the idea was hers. Then, on the day of the anniversary, they gather to bury the time capsule. But Lucinda is still off to the side, sad and withdrawn. Teacher Taylor notices her and feels sorry that Lucinda isn't as happy and joyful as the other kids her age. Then, Taylor looks at her again but finds that Lucinda has disappeared. She searches everywhere but can't find her. At that point, the school calls the police to help look for her. Meanwhile, Taylor goes down to the basement to search for Lucinda and finds her behind a door, crying, with her hands bleeding. Lucinda pleads with Taylor to help her stop the voices in her head that she's constantly hearing and that she's grown tired of. About 50 years later, and John with his young son, Caleb, who is still in school. Caleb, filled with curiosity and excitement, asks his father, "Do you think there could be life on another planet besides Earth?" At that moment, John, who loved his son very much, spent time with Caleb calculating the number of possibilities based on the number of planets and their ratio to Earth. Caleb was able to calculate all the possibilities with ease, showing incredible intelligence. His father was amazed by Caleb's extraordinary intellect, which was unlike anything he had ever seen. Then Caleb ran off to catch a documentary on TV, but his father, John, called him to wait so they could eat together. However, Caleb replied, "I've decided to be a vegetarian, Dad. You go ahead and enjoy your meal." Later, John went to Caleb's room and said, "I didn't mean that if there's life on another planet, it would be heaven and your mom would be there." This made Caleb upset, and he went to sleep. Later, John remembers the 50th anniversary of the old celebration and decides he must attend it because they will be opening the time capsule from that time. The next day, John drops his son off at school and then goes to work, where he teaches cosmology. While explaining the theories of the universe's origin, he is deeply affected, as if he's remembering a cherished memory. At that moment, a student asks him, "What's your opinion, Professor, on the theories of the universe's origin?" John replies, "I believe that everything happened by chance, and there's no reason or purpose behind anything that occurred." The lecture ends, and everyone starts to leave. Then, John's friend Phil invites him to a party at his house the following Friday. Phil was planning this in hopes of setting John up with his sister-in-law, since John had lived many years without his wife, who had passed away. However, John doesn't want to go because he is well aware of Phil's plan to set him up with someone. Nevertheless, Phil insists on him coming to check on him. John then remembers his son's party and apologizes, saying he has another commitment and leaves. John arrives at the party, where his son Caleb is singing with his classmates during the event's opening. They also host teacher Taylor, the only person still alive from those who witnessed the time capsule. Then, Taylor opens the time capsule and distributes the papers to the students randomly. Caleb receives the paper with the numbers that Lucinda had written. The students start making fun of Caleb because his paper only has numbers and no drawing. Then, Caleb notices a stranger standing far away and hears strange voices in his ears. Soon after, the stranger disappears again. Later, they return home, and when John sees Caleb's paper, he tells him that it should be returned to the school because it likely belongs to them. Caleb replies, "I thought it was a puzzle and I was trying to solve it." Then, Caleb goes to bed, and John follows to check on him. When John finds Caleb watching a video of his mother singing to him, he becomes deeply saddened. He then goes down to the basement to drink and drown his sorrows. Then, by chance, John notices Lucinda's paper with the numbers on it when the whiskey spills on it. At that moment, he realizes that these numbers might be dates, and not just random figures. John manages to extract several dates from the paper and searches for them online. He discovers that on those dates, disasters occurred that resulted in a large number of deaths. The number of casualties matches the figures written next to the dates on the paper. John then pieces everything together and finds multiple dates and the numbers following them. He discovers that these numbers correspond to the number of deaths in disasters that occurred on those specific dates. After finishing all the dates, John discovers that there are 3 dates yet to come, meaning Lucinda managed to predict future events. The next day, John goes to the university and tells Phil about his findings. He informs him that an accident is expected to happen the next day, which will result in 81 deaths. He also reveals that one of these predicted incidents is the accident that led to his wife's death. Phil doesn't believe anything and thinks it could all just be coincidence, with no practical evidence to support John's claims. John, frustrated, responds, "Not everyone will experience what I felt after my wife died." The next day, Caleb is playing in the yard in front of their house. A car pulls up, and one of the people inside gives Caleb a black stone among other stones. John notices this, rushes over, but the car drives away. He warns Caleb to be careful. John spends the rest of his life focused on Lucinda, the girl who was able to predict everything. He then goes to see teacher Taylor to learn more about Lucinda, as she is the only one left from her generation. Taylor tells John about Lucinda's introversion and the day she hid in the school basement, injuring her hands and writing strange things and numbers on the door. On that day, Lucinda was scared and said she was hearing voices telling her to stop. John returns home and continues documenting information about Lucinda and the cause of her death. He then sits in front of the TV, waiting for the accident that will result in the deaths of 81 people. The next day, John wakes up late and his son calls from school, saying he's been waiting and John hasn't shown up. John gets in his car to pick up his son, but the road is congested and heavily trafficked. John notices the location coordinates on his GPS, which match the numbers on the paper he couldn't previously interpret. He gets out of his car and asks the police why the road is blocked. John can't get a clear explanation from the police. Suddenly, a plane crashes from the sky, destroying many cars and causing chaos. John runs towards the burning wreckage and tries to help the people trapped until the rescue teams arrive. John returns home, deeply depressed from the impact of the accident. His sister is with Caleb, and he asks them to leave him alone. He then goes to his room to wallow in his sorrow. Phil comes to visit John and has become convinced that the paper truly predicts the deaths of people after seeing the location coordinates. They start looking for the next predicted event and discover that a large number of people will die. They try to find any solution to prevent the impending disaster. Later that night, while Caleb is in his room, the same man who gave him the stone earlier appears again. He gestures toward the window, and when Caleb looks outside, he sees the forest on fire, with many animals dying and everything burning before them. Caleb screams and falls to the ground in fear. John rushes over to see what's wrong and sees the strange man standing in front of the house. John approaches him with a baseball bat, but when he gets outside, the man has disappeared and is nowhere to be found. The next day, John drives to Lucinda's house and sees her daughter, Diana, with her own daughter, Abby. He follows them in his car, and they head to a museum of animals. John and his son Caleb follow Diana and Abby into the museum. John has Caleb approach Abby to strike up a conversation with Diana. John then sits with Diana and confesses that he followed her to get information about her mother and her life in hopes of preventing any more deaths. Diana thinks John is crazy and takes Abby with her, leaving while John continues to try to convince her without success. John returns home and searches for the coordinates of the next predicted event. He discovers that the incident is set to occur in the subway system in Manhattan. John calls the subway authority and warns them to shut down the subway for just one day, or many people will die. On the day of the anticipated incident, Caleb arrives at his aunt's house and tells her not to turn on the TV. John goes to the subway to confirm that it has been closed, but he finds that everything is operating normally. He then notices a heavy police presence aimed at apprehending a suspect who is believed to be trying to bomb the subway. John enters the subway and suspects a person of carrying a bomb. After chasing him, he realizes it's just a petty thief with a book. Then, John discovers that a subway train has derailed. He shouts at everyone to flee, but the train comes crashing down and kills many people. John returns to his sister's place, takes Caleb, and goes back home, feeling mentally exhausted and deeply upset that he couldn't save the lives lost. When he arrives home, he finds Diana and Abby waiting for him. Diana then confesses to John that her mother, Lucinda, had predicted the date of her own death, which is still to come in the future. Diana had been skeptical about anyone being able to predict the future and determine people's dates of death. However, after the subway incident, she is now convinced of her mother Lucinda's predictions. John then tells Diana about his wife, who died on a work trip when a fire broke out in the hotel, and she suffocated. Diana is moved by his story, and together they arrive at Lucinda's old house. This is the house where Lucinda spent her last days after deciding to live alone, and she died from an overdose. During that time, she had been hearing strange voices and seeing odd and suspicious people. John enters the house and explores all the rooms. He finds a room filled with information about the various incidents Lucinda had predicted. He also sees a peculiar drawing featuring a sun, suggesting that an upcoming event is related to the sun. They then enter Lucinda's bedroom, where she died. John finds a stone similar to the one the man in the forest gave his son. Looking under the bed, he discovers a large number of stones of the same type. John also finds scratches under the bed. He flips the bed over and discovers a message that says, "Everyone will die an infinite number of times." At that moment, the strange people appear outside the house near the car, with Caleb and Abby inside, who are left alone. The strange people outside were communicating through thoughts and whispers. They began whispering to Caleb and Abby, trying to lure them to come with them. Abby opens the door to leave with them, but Caleb quickly honks the car horn to alert his father and get his attention. John and Diana quickly come outside when they hear their children. John runs after one of the strange people, but when he catches up, the person opens their mouth, emitting a blinding light. John is unable to see anything clearly and experiences a vision disturbance. John regains his senses and finds no one around. He gathers everyone and takes them to his home for the night. There, Caleb begins writing numbers rapidly, similar to how Lucinda used to, as if some strange force is controlling him. John notices this and quickly intervenes to snap Caleb out of it. John takes the paper from Caleb, but Caleb continues to write on the desk with his nails. After John shakes him vigorously, Caleb finally snaps out of his trance. The next day, John wakes up and finds Abby drawing the same picture Lucinda had drawn before her death. The drawing features a prominent sun and a man standing in front of it, appearing to be pleading for help, suggesting a looming catastrophe related to the sun. John takes Caleb, Diana, and Abby to the Astronomical Research Institute where he works. There, he and his colleague Phil discover that the sun's temperature will rise significantly, causing it to penetrate the ozone layer and the atmosphere, threatening to impact Earth. Phil is shocked by the impending disaster and wants to contact all the official agencies to find a solution. John tells him that the news will become known eventually and advises Phil to spend time with his wife and children, searching for any underground shelter where they can stay cool. At that moment, Diana overhears the conversation, and John notices her and goes after her. Diana is very scared and asks John if finding an underground shelter will ensure they survive. John responds, "It might." Diana tells John that she knows of a group of caves along the highway that no one else knows about and suggests they hide there. They then get into the car and head towards the caves. On the way, John has an idea to visit the school and check the basement, where Lucinda had written the numbers on the door. He concludes that Lucinda must have been unable to complete writing the numbers on the paper because Taylor took it from her, just as he had taken the paper from Caleb, and Caleb kept writing on the desk. John takes the door back to his home to study and examine it. Meanwhile, Diana decides to take the children and flee. She sneaks them away from John and heads towards the cave to try to protect them. John is still at home, trying to remove the paint from the door to reveal the numbers. He uncovers the coordinates, which suggest a potential shelter that could protect them from the sun's harmful rays. To his realization, the coordinates point to Lucinda's own house. When John goes outside, he discovers that Diana has taken the children and left. He tries to call her throughout the journey, but he is unable to reach her due to a lack of network coverage. Meanwhile, Diana stops on the road to refill the car's empty tank so she can continue her journey. As time passes, John searches everywhere for Diana and the children. Meanwhile, Caleb tries to call his father but can't remember the name of the station where they are. Authorities and governments are informing the public through the media that a significant solar flare is expected, which will destroy the entire planet. People are advised to seek shelter in any underground hideout to protect themselves from the impending explosion. Diana contacts John and apologizes for taking the kids without informing him. At that moment, the mysterious people have taken Caleb and Abby from the car and left with them. Diana runs after them, screaming. She notices the black stone she saw at the telephone booth and connects it to the strange stones found in her mother's room. Diana gets into a car accident while chasing the mysterious people and loses consciousness. John arrives at the station, learns from people there which way Diana went, and drives after her. He encounters an accident on the road and sees Diana being taken away in an ambulance. Unfortunately, Diana dies, confirming her mother's prediction about her death on that day. When John sees the black stone in Diana's hand, he realizes that the mysterious people were the ones who abducted her. He grabs his gun and rushes down the road in pursuit of them. John arrives at a location filled with an endless number of strange stones. He starts shouting for Caleb and Abby, desperately trying to find them. He spots one of the mysterious people and threatens them with his gun, demanding to know where his son is. John is stunned as Caleb explains that the mysterious people were actually trying to help them all along. They had chosen to help him and his family by transporting them to another planet, away from the impending disaster on Earth. John is heartbroken when he learns that only Caleb and Abby will be transported to the new planet, not him. Despite his desperate pleas and attempts to convince them, the mysterious beings explain that their plan only allows for the children to be saved. John bids a heartbreaking farewell to Caleb, who reassures him that they will be reunited in the future, along with their mother, and will live together forever in a new place. As the spaceships descend and the mysterious beings transform into white light, they embark on their journey to the new planet. John sits devastated on the ground, having lost Caleb and the other children who were chosen to start a new life on another planet. Meanwhile, Caleb and the other selected children arrive on their new world, beginning a new chapter in humanity's existence as Earth faces its destruction. John wakes up to the sunrise on Earth, deciding to spend his final day with his family. He returns home where his sister and parents are gathered, sharing a final embrace. Then, a massive solar flare erupts, beginning to burn and destroy the entire planet. Human life comes to an end. The movie ends.